In a way, you can say Mayones invented SA series for Ibanez by trying to copy it. Hello, my name is Michał and I'm on Ibbyhead. This channel is a journey to document every Ibanez guitar ever made. Although today, we don't really have an Ibanez here. We have Mayones that I think was inspired by Saber series. But let's dig into this. This day Mayones is known as this high-end producer of nearly custom shop grade guitars. They're very expensive and they're made in small series. They're based in Gdańsk in northern Poland, which happens to be the area where I grew up. So when I was growing up, there was a lot of Mayones circling around. Because they started as just a small shop making guitars in Cold War behind Iron Curtain Poland. We didn't have access to Western-made guitars. What was available in the market was made in Soviet Union, East Germany or Czechoslovakia. They weren't great guitars. Mayones was able to produce guitars that were maybe nicer than some of those imports. And over the years they became better and better at their craft. I remember when I was starting to play guitar in the 2000s, they started to build their own designs under the Mayones brand, and they moved production of the copied and inspired instruments into the other brands like Flame. I remember there was a lot of Les Paul SG and the Ibanez RG copies under that brand, circling around my guitar friends at that time. I played multiple Flame LPs and bunch of EXGs. I think that's how they were called, the RG copy. I think the first high-end instruments they did was basses. They at some point specialized in it, but then moved also to 6-string and 7-string instruments. This particular guitar comes from the early to mid-90s. I reached out to a few sources, including the owner, who's my friend, and I just happened to take custody of this guitar while he studies abroad. And to me, this looks inspired by the Ibanez S or Saber series. It's even commonly known as Mayones S series, so maybe there is something to it. In contrast to Saber guitars, it's arch only on top and has a flat back, so more like SA series. You can say Mayones invented SA series for Ibanez by trying to copy it and probably finding a less labor-intensive approach to this guitar, since first SA guitar appeared around 2000. Or maybe I'm just, looking too much into this. We'll never know. I also reached out to a few other subject matter experts on that era Mayones. Will compare my research with what I find with this guitar, because I need to replace the nut and I need to do some setup, and while we do it we can just look into if there's any markings, date stamps or other information we could find. So let's dig into this. I have a few goals with this workshop. First, I need to replace the nut. The guitar has a lot of tuning issues. I think it's mostly due to the nut. Tuners are okay, those are high quality Schaller tuners and they're completely fine. But there's a cheap plastic nut there, and it's been the grooves got deeper, and there's no proper break angle on that nut. Just measured the dimension and found the one that matches the best. This is actually nut for Yamaha Pacifica. That seems to be fitting perfectly, we're gonna see that. So for that, I'm not gonna remove strings, just loosen them up because it's gonna make it easier to align. And then after we install the nut, I think just go through internals of this guitar, because I want to learn as much as possible about it. Okay, I surrendered the nut for now. I think I need some chisel or something like that to help me out. But let's look at other parts of this guitar. Bridge and tailpiece screwed together. It's Schaller S456 or just Schaller 456. It's very interesting. It's pretty massive. You can see that this body is arched towards the back. So it's kind of hanging into the air. I think having this one-piece bridge and tailpiece allowed them just to put it here and the rest could hang out. Tony Iommi is known for playing this bridge, and they're kind of expensive these days. The saddles are numbered, which kind of makes sense because, you know, they also slotted from thinnest to the thickest string. Screws here for doing intonation, and as I said, micro tuners. The other thing I'm interested in is like electronics in this guitar. Some sources claim those are Schaller pickups, but they don't look like Schaller pickups. They're most likely Mayones made, but we're gonna just see is there any markings there or any other interesting information. Okay, let's see. There's a lot of dust in here. Gonna vacuum that later, but absolutely nothing written on the pickup. I'm gonna assume that those are like Mayones pickups. They made by themselves. Probably they put Schaller pickups into more expensive guitars and their own into the cheaper ones. So for example, their other brand, Zack, that was for mostly German market, would have everything Schaller. This one has a Schaller tuners, like machine head, so I was hoping that those may be Schallers too, but it doesn't look like so. I'm going to check out the single coils too. That will be able to take the covers from those pickups or see anything, but there's no access into internals. It's probably pretty good for those pickups, but we're not going to learn anything new about them. To be honest, they're not very great sounding pickups, so it's probably like confirms they're like early in-house Mayones ones. Another thing I think we can do is like look into the back, into the electronics, maybe look into the neck joint if there's anything interesting there. Compared to Ibanez, those screws are very small. Doesn't look very reliable neck joint. Whew. There was some fuckery in here, definitely. The tone is like much smaller than the volume. The switch looks pretty bad. It also doesn't look like a high quality switch. The wood is splintered. I wonder if it was done, or maybe somebody replaced that pot and had to like make space for it, and that's why the wood is chiseled out. Anyway, those are again unnamed electronics, so I don't think it's running Schaller electronics. Let's look at that neck joint while we're here. Okay, so I think this was a way to mask this really ugly neck joint. This looked like just a wooden screw. I'm gonna take manual screwdriver because this won't have enough torque, and I'm curious what's inside. Like Ibanez usually has something interesting in a neck pocket or stamped on the neck, but the neck looks like it's glued on top of the screws, so I'm not gonna force it, I'm just gonna close it up. Okay, so off camera I managed to also replace that nut. It wasn't so hard after all. The guitar feels and sounds much better with the nut. The new strings probably also helped. After a few hours it seems that tuning stability is much better, but we'll need to, like, you know, take some more time to have like final judgment. I think it's an upgrade. Okay, so what do we know in this guitar? First of all, I learned from my friend who's the owner that his sister bought it from already second hand in 1999. So we know it's older than 1999. It's guitar from the 90s. Ibanez also changed their logo a lot around that period, so this also helped us to kind of like pin down into first half of the 90s. Then I reached out to Mateusz from the Polish Love blog, who documents Polish brands making guitars, and he was the one that told me that even though Mayones didn't really pay attention to naming because they were making like guitars in the small numbers, a lot of modifications, a lot of single orders, but this is commonly known as Mayones S series. He owns guitar with the same body that's under brand Zack. That was Mayones brand that they exported guitars to Germany. They had like slightly better hardware and so on. It had completely different headstock, more pointy, It also has like the bird inlays that's known from PRS and rosewood fretboard. So same body, different neck, and kind of like changes the vibe of the guitar, but it's also apparently the S series. And I also shoot email to Mayones, and I get answer from Arthur, who is their production manager, and he said without serial number it's hard to like check the register, which they apparently have, but this guitar looks like the model S456 from early 90s. I'm not entirely sure about that name. This is the Schaller 456 bridge, so maybe, you know, I was confused by the name of the bridge, but maybe it was just internally known as 456 because using that bridge. So it was gonna be hard to like find something to confirm or deny this naming, and this works for me so far, you know, it's not that important after all. At that time, most of Mayones bodies were made of alder. I can see some grain here through that transparent cherry burst finish. It's consistent from what like alder looks like, so I think it makes sense. It's three-piece body, you can kind of see through that finish the borders between the different pieces. The top is arched and the back is flat, as I mentioned. There are cutaways here around the neck joint that remind, you know, modern Ibanez RGAs or what Schaller Guitars does, for example. Even though the back is flat, there's kind of like a cutaway and the tilt heel, very similar to 90 Ibanez again. You could see on the bench video that under the plastic cover there are hidden the 4 screws that actually bolt the neck to the body. Maybe they wanted to hide this carpentry grade screws. They're not so nice as some used in the modern guitars. But this is the first time I saw this kind of solution to the problem. Usually you can see like a steel plate or, you know, just the ferrules and kind of nicer screws like with Ibanez A and J. Depending on sources, at that time Mayones made their fretboards and necks out of maple or sycamore maple. That is a fairly common tone wood in that part of Europe. The grain looks slightly different, the kind of the maple I know from Ibanez guitars. That's East Asian maple or maple sourced from Canada. So maybe it is the sycamore maple, or maybe just, you know, the maple grown locally has a different growth patterns and it just looks differently. It kind of has those bird's eye qualities in some places, so it's a nice maple. The neck is covered with transparent finish. On the headstock you can see it's a satin, but the neck is kind of like polished, I guess, for many years of playing. It's thinner than Wizard neck. It's slightly different profile. Wizard is like very flat on the back. This has this kind of like flatten. This is a consistently round, so it's like kind of much more rounded profile. It has 42 millimeters width at the nut and around 57 at the neck pocket. So again, a very consistent work like you can expect from Ibanez. The fretboard is also very flat. It looks like 400 millimeters radius, around 16 inches. And the scale is very super Strati standard, 25.5 inches. Headstock is obviously very similar to Ibanez. It just likes this kind of like step on the pointy end of the beak pattern, but otherwise it's very similar. It's hard to deny. It's glued using the scarf joint to the guitar, and I think the break angle is a bit too small. Speaking of the headstock, there's also binding just on the headstock. It's kind of weird, but I guess some sort of decoration. The guitar is currently tuned in standard E. The strings I put on are like 942s, and I'm usually used to playing like 1046 or thicker strings, so this feels like really easy to bend. I remember this guitar was very easy to play when I jumped in from acoustics, and you know, that was my first electric, so obviously it felt easy, but it still feels super nice and easy to play. I quite enjoy it, and probably that nut upgrade helped with that, you know, that those bands doesn't really detune it anymore. So as I mentioned, the hardware is black. There are Schaller tuners, and we have black Schaller 456 bridge. This bridge is no longer produced, and it's getting kind of astronomical prices on the secondary market. And I think it's because Tony Iommi used this style of bridge on his old boy guitar, and people who want to kind of like emulate that build want to use them. It's a very interesting bridge because it has a bridge and tailpiece bolted together. You have those screws that you can kind of like move it back or closer to the kind of You have a separate regulation for, intonation for each strings, and then micro tuners. So there's like a lot of variables you can change with this bridge. Very easy to kind of like pinpoint the setup on this guitar using that bridge. It also has this kind of like a Floyd feeling in a way, like a locked Floyd, like you have a big piece of metal under your palm with those fine tuners. When I remember that guitar but haven't seen her for years, I was sure that Floyd just kind of like bolted into the body. But now when I see it's not. It's probably the most valuable part of this guitar at this point. And I think remembering the bridge was like what made me get really interested and liked it, like the fixed Floyd on the Mick Thompson guitars that he used on Ibanez and later on Jackson. The pickups are in HSS configuration. Some people said that could be Schallers, but the humbuckers doesn't look like Schaller. It has the magnets poles look differently. And there are no markings in the back. Usually Schaller gear will have like made in Germany and Schaller logo in the back. The singles sound okay. They're, not great, but not bad either. The humbucker is very trebly and underpowered. We saw also there was like some meddling with the pods. I think the original had those small pods and the volume was replaced at some point. So they need to like scrape that wood that we saw in the cavity. The switch is very satisfying and feels really good, but it looks pretty crappy, I don't know, but it's still working, so as long as everything is fine, I'm not gonna mess with it. We have also jack localized here, and we have one cavity in the back with like one plastic cover that gives access to all that electronics all together. The jack is very close by and all the knobs, so very nicely packed together, to be honest. And to top off, we have like black non-locking strap pins in like standard, non-controversial positions. So the guitar looks its age. It has a lot of like scratches, bumps, some touch-ups, probably with the nail polish. There are some scratches on the neck, but otherwise it's, mechanically fully functional, electronically so far functional. I think if it's gonna be taken care of, it's gonna serve another generation of musicians. I see a lot of parallels to Ibanez in this guitar. And I'm not sure it's because I'm such an Ibanez obsessed person or they really, draw their inspiration. For sure it inspired how I look at the guitars. The HSS configuration is one of my favorite pickup configuration. I love those kind of fixed Floyds and massive bridges, and I don't really enjoy like small fixed bridges. And I always enjoyed the kind of sleek body of Saber series. So it's definitely impacted me, whether it was inspired by Ibanez Saber or not. I hope you found it interesting. I know it's not Ibanez, so we jumped off from the regular topic. But on the next episode, we're gonna come back to regular programming. If you want more Ibanez content, I already have a bunch of videos you can take a look. For example, this one suggested by the algorithm. Maybe you wanna check the last video I did about my previous first guitar, which was my first Ibanez, the RG57GF. Feel free to like that video, subscribe, all that stuff, if that's your thing, and see you in another episode of documenting every Ibanez guitar ever made. And sometimes non-Ibanez.